Hello, everybody. Welcome to another very special episode of Carlton People. I'm joined by one of my all-time favourites. You'll get to know his story very shortly. I speak of none other than Mr. Eli Lipshatz, all the way from Tel Aviv. What's going on, brother?
Yeah, g'day, Terry. I'm just happy to be here, mate. It's such an honour to be on your podcast. I mean, it's a video these days. I used to, I think I was with you during the roots of the channel and one of the biggest fans, I would say. I get around all the content, love it. Just honoured. I feel, yeah.
No, I appreciate that, mate. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you making some time for me, even though we've got an 8 or 9 hour time difference. And I think you're right. I think you were one of the first. You would have been one of the very first in-person guests when we did the audio podcast a couple of years back.
Yeah. It was inside. Was it WeWork at the time that you were working at? Yeah. And that was a good chat. That was a great chat. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, we get to see you in person now, and I'm sure a lot of people are curious, so they can hear that beautiful Aussie accent of yours. You're living in Tel Aviv. You're a Carlton supporter, so we need to unpack it all. Let's start from the very beginning. I mean, where does your Carlton story begin from?
So this is actually a really interesting story. I mean, I'm Jewish, and the Jews there's a big Jewish community in Melbourne, and they sort of started coming to Australia about 5 generations ago. That's when the first people came. So my grandfather's grandfather was actually one of the first Jews to come, and they lived in Shepparton. And then from Shepparton, they moved to Carlton. And Carlton was sort of the hub of the Jewish community, sort of like Caulfield is now. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that. So Carlton was what the team my grandfather supported sort of during the glory days, and he always used to walk down to Princess Park on a Saturday and watch the games because he was religious, so he couldn't drive. And then pretty much from there, from his side of the family, I'm a Carlton supporter. The rest of my family is Geelong, but they sort of didn't go to the games when I was a kid, so I used to go with my grandfather and my cousins, and since then I've been a big Carlton supporter.
What's your first memory of either going to the footy or watching the footy? How far back does it go?
Yeah, well, I don't have such good memories of when I was like starting to go to the footy, because those were like the dog days of when we just got the salary cap infringement, and then those were also, I remember being surrounded by all these people that just expected Carlton success, and all of a sudden Carlton was shit, and it was like, what's going on? And sort of people lost their passion a bit, and not too much. But then, I sort of remember sort of during high school that's when, as a Carlton supporter, I really started to become passionate. And, you'd be following all the news and the teams, and the result of a Carlton match would sort of dictate the mood for the first few days of the next week. And there'd be all that banter at school. We've pretty much had like a lot of St Kilda supporters at my school, a lot of Collingwood supporters, a lot of Carlton supporters. So Collingwood and St Kilda were like in there, they were really reaching their peak, and then Carlton were pretty bad. But then towards the end of 2010, we sort of started to become a lot better. And that's when I was like in year 9, year 10, year 11. And pretty much since then, I've just been an absolute fanatic.
Yeah, no, we will certainly get into that and into how you and I met. Talk to me about, because obviously when I lived in Israel, I met quite a few Carlton supporters, and I understood the story of how, obviously migrated through and lived in Carlton, which was news to me at the time. So obviously with keeping Shabbat, what's it like experiencing the footy on a day where you probably can't be going out and doing too much?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Shabbat is like the Jewish Sabbath, which if you're religious, which I did grow up as an observant Jew, you can't use technology. So that means like no mobile phones, no TV. And there's a lot of people that are observant Jews. There's a lot of people that aren't. So, but I grew up observant, which meant that any Friday night or Saturday game we couldn't watch live. Saturday night games, we'd have to sort of, as soon as it was nighttime, which is when the Shabbat ends, we'd have to like quickly drive to the train. Sometimes we'd miss like part of the first quarter. And then Sunday was when we played our sports. So a lot of the time on Sunday, we couldn't even go to games. So there weren't too many live games I was going to. something that we used to do if it was like a great Saturday game or even sometimes a Friday night game is we'd sort of, well, now it's familiar because we'd pretty much do like the AFL is doing, like we'd do hubs where just a few Carlton supporters would go into a house, spend all day together and not look, not look outside in case we saw a scarf flying and not check the scores. And then as soon as it was out, we'd just turn it up. We'd turn on the replay without knowing the scores and just watch it from start to finish as if it was live. And that's sort of how we kept up with the adrenaline of watching live games.
Wow. So what, in between, you just talk amongst yourselves and do whatever?
Yeah, made some great memories of like, playing board games for the whole of Saturday afternoon or even like being outside playing backyard cricket or whatever. And then as soon as, 6 p.m., 7 p.m. hit, just jumping on the couch, fast forwarding between quarter breaks and just like making sure no one checked their phones and no one got any updates. And also like, you'd have to have actual hubs because you couldn't have people coming in and out who weren't locking down.
Yep.
So it's funny now that I think of it. It's sort of like a Corona hub.
That's
the way that
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So you're in year 9, year 10. When do you move to Israel?
Yeah, so I finished VCE in Melbourne, and then I did a gap year in Israel, and I've always been really passionate about it. And I wanted to sort of go to the military there, which a lot of people do. Like all Israelis, it's mandatory to go to the military. So I did that when I was 19. And it sort of sounds like, I'm sure to people who are far into it, it sounds wild. But I did that sort of at that point, stopped being observant so I could actually watch all the games live when I was in Israel. And I ended up staying in the army for sort of like for 4 years, became an officer. And then just 2 years ago, I got out. So now I'm 25. And like the army sort of really challenged. It was also when we went through like our second lull, and it challenged my supportership. But I was like an avid supporter throughout. And I mean, we'll talk about some of the stories, but it was I wouldn't imagine the players when Paddy Cripps is putting on his boots, he's not thinking like, geez, there's someone watching me on the Israel-Syrian border, on a phone in the only place where there's cellular data. So it was pretty special, pretty unique.
You have to dive deeper. You've got to. Obviously, I know the stories. We've chatted many a time about some of the wacky places that we've watched games from. I thought being in a little Chinese takeaway shop in the middle of nowhere, just so I could get a good signal to watch a game, was wacky. But please enlighten me and the audience as to where's the wackiest place you've watched a game from.
Yeah, so I'll just give a bit of background. Like, I was in combat, like an elite combat unit. So during training, you don't get your phone. You're sort of out in the fields and you don't get your phone. The only time you get your phone is on like a Friday before you go home, or sometimes you even close, like you stay on the base, and then you'll only get your phone when you're leaving the base. So we would leave the phone. I'd open my phone and I'd see, like, after not checking it for like 2 weeks, and I'd see 500 messages or whatever. I wouldn't check a single message until I'd watched the Carlton game of the previous week, or sometimes even the previous 2 weeks. Like it was just a challenging experience. Like sometimes I'd be watching round 6 games, like at round 8, round 9, without still knowing the score from round 6, because I just love that adrenaline. And in terms of like the craziest story, and this is like a really crazy one, the Collingwood West Coast Grand Final of 2018 was right towards the end of my service. And so, as I mentioned, at that point, we were sitting on the Israeli-Syrian border, sort of just on the Israeli side, making sure that nothing was the Syrian civil war was sort of going on, and we were just making sure that nothing was seeping into our end. And you could literally go on top of these bunkers at nighttime and see them. Like, it was really incredible. You'd sort of see like the fireworks from their 2 different sides, and I was like, but that was the only place you could get cellular data, was on top of these bunkers. And I was like, Collingwood West Coast Grand Final, Collingwood went up 5 goals, and I was doing something until then that I couldn't watch, and then I was like, West Coast are coming back. There's no way I'm missing this. So I'm watching, and the only place that you could get enough data to actually watch this game. And if Collingwood would have won it, I would have said probably wasn't worth the risk. But Collingwood lost, and Dom Sheed kicked that goal, and it's like, thank you very much. I'll do that every single day in the week. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really dangerous. It's just like somewhere that you don't go unless you're meant to be there. And I was like, nah, not missing this, guys.
Worth every single bit of risk, if you ask me.
Yeah. And I remember, like, sometimes it happens at the AFL live stream or watch AFL. It's sort of, you notice when more and more people are tuning in, because sometimes it gets like laggy. And towards the end, I remember it getting laggy, and I had to like put my hand up so that I could get more and watch it like that. Like the Dom Sheed goal, I was literally watching like this.
That is brilliant. That is brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a bit of perspective for us lucky buggers here in Melbourne who, I mean, obviously we don't get to go to games right now because of what's, the situation that is, but, we get to watch it live. And I mean, mate, I still remember, before we get into watching games with you, I still remember the first time I ever met you. We're kicking the footy around with the Tel Aviv Cheetahs, we're training. And I don't know what led you to come to this training session, but you were there, and I remember you rocked up with your Carlton training singlet on, and you're a very fit looking bloke, and I'm like, yes, this is the exact kind of guy I need to be around.
Yeah, mate. But those memories from the Tel Aviv Cheetahs and then the Dragons, like such good memories together.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, really just like what a special time.
Yeah. So for those at home that aren't aware, we pioneered a couple of footy teams with some others as well. But we were training every Monday. We had got a good group, and it was interesting because for me personally, being the Aussie, I'm not Jewish, so I didn't have that personal, mission to be in Israel. It was more something I fell in love with. It was like a chance I took and fell in love with it. And so, for me, it was like, I need a slice of home, and the chance to kick a footy around was what allowed me to just keep sane. And a lot of the sentiment for a lot of you guys who moved from Australia, grew up and either came to Israel to go to the army like yourself, or for whatever other reason, it's almost like it was you got your Australian back. Is that something that resonated with you?
Yeah, mate, completely. Like, while I was in the army for those 4 years, pretty much all of my friends were Israeli. And since then, since I've been sort of settling into a normal life in Tel Aviv, sort of just naturally all my friends have become Australians. And it's Australians that I didn't know when I was in Melbourne. Like, there's just a special bond. There's a special, like, way of interacting with Australians that's, like, very banterous, but there's a really high level of respect. And, shared interests and just shared memories of, like, I mean, Australia's an amazing country. And I think it's what brings us together, is just like the love of Australia and the love of the culture. So yeah, pretty much all my day-to-day friends at the moment, because my Israeli friends are like scattered around, my day-to-day friends are Australians that have moved to Israel. We've got like a really big community here. Every so often a player, not anymore, but like a player will come to Tel Aviv. Like last year it was Swanee, the year before was Nick Nat, and they're just like, what is this? Like, why am I hanging out with Australians? We had one of the funniest nights I'll remember with Swanee, and he was just like confused. I mean, for a whole host of reasons he was confused, but like one of the reasons he was confused was like, who are you guys? What are you doing? Like, this is the Middle East. But yeah, I completely resonate with that. Like the footy team sort of kicked that whole community off for a lot of people, and you were the driving force. Like, it really hasn't recovered since you left, just because of like the passion and the way that you were able to bring everyone together was truly amazing, Tez.
I appreciate that, mate, but this is not about me. This is about you. I've got to cast your mind back, because we've spoken about some of the highs. I remember watching a game with you and Bomb and our American friend Sam. Sam he had never watched a game of footy, but we had, anointed him as a Carlton supporter, and I'll never forget, it was 2018, I believe. And it was the GWS game where we just kicked the first goal of the game. It was 5:30 a.m. I think it was. We were sitting in your room. What do you remember about that?
Mate, that was the game, I think, where GWS had injuries and they were just like, don't worry about it, we'll play 16 on the field. And they're still just like carving us up like training hats. I mean, those are the really challenging ones, especially when you're trying to build that community. And I think that year as well, we watched the North game together, which is another game that was just like a train wreck. And we almost got superstitious. We're like, we can't watch games together anymore because Carlton just don't perform when we're all watching together. I mean, I don't think that I remember watching a win with you.
No, we never did. We watched round one. We watched round one and two others together. They were all obviously. Round one was okay because we made a bit of a push, but it just wasn't to be, mate. I think what's going to happen is you're going to have to come back to Melbourne and we're going to have to go to a game together.
Mate, for sure. For sure. Yeah, like it looks like we're on the up. You can only hope. So yeah, mate, I always tease my mum. She's like, "What do you miss about home?" Expecting me to say like, "Oh, the chicken soup or whatever," and I'm like, "Footy and cricket."
Footy,
No, I miss them very much as well. But it's just for sure, mate. I can't wait to watch a game with you.
So it's a good segue because obviously 2018 was the lowest of low points, and in a way, it was probably a blessing that we were in Tel Aviv for it. So we fast forward now. At the time of recording this, we're about to get to round 5 of 2020, and we're 2-2. I believe personally that we're starting to turn a corner. But what are you seeing over there? Because obviously, you're watching games. The news doesn't filter through to Tel Aviv as much as what it does to here, just by nature of the fact that if you go to a cafe, for example, the newspaper's there, you can see the back page and read through it. So what are you seeing from the club on a high level?
Yeah, on a high level, I definitely think that what David Teague has brought is something that we haven't had in a long time, which is just we play every game to win. We're not interested in, long-term development. We're not interested in how we're going to, a 5-year plan. We want to win now. And I really love that about him. I think Brendan Bolton was way too focused on future, blooding young talent. And that's why when, a guy like Jack Nunes, like I like seeing him in the team because I like the idea of, we're not just playing Paddy or Dow's injured now, but we're not just gifting games to young players so that one day they'll be good. Like we're playing to win now. And I think that a winning culture will breed more wins and more wins. And that's something that I didn't feel with Brendan Bolton at all. Like even the way that we put Curnow forward and we took Murphy out of the guts, like that was all about future and it wasn't about winning now. And I think the best thing for a young kid's development is to win. Even if I think it's better for a young kid's development to be playing in the VFL and for the AFL side to be winning than for him to be playing AFL and the team to be losing. Because as we see, like winning is it's a habit and you learn to win. Like it's a skill. We've now won a few close games in a row, and that's it's a skill that the Hawthorns have, the Geelongs have, that we just don't have. So I think breeding wins is the best way to develop young kids, even if it means that they're not being exposed to that same level of opportunity. And that's that's the direction that I like about the club at the moment. And I think that we've brought in some really nice players to help win now. Like I didn't think we'd think this about Pitnet, but mate, he's a ready-made ruckman. And Jack Martin, like immediate impact, and Eddie. That's why I sort of love bringing in Eddie, because people say, "Oh, he's only got 1 or 2 years." It's like, okay, that's fine, but he's going to help us win, and that's what the young players need at the moment. So I think we're building momentum through that culture, and I like the direction of the club. As I've heard you say a few times this week, we've got PTSD, so we're all very skeptical and cynical, and any close game sort of feels like something that would just we're going to let go of this. So I still have that, but I do like some of the direction that I'm seeing.
Yeah. I love your point about you'd rather a kid play in the VFL when the AFL team's winning as opposed to playing the AFL when the team's losing. I think that's spot on, and I think we're seeing a bit of a shift in our, I don't know if it's expectations or whatnot, because we've come from let's call it the Bolton era, where a guy like Stocker, O'Brien, they'd all be playing right now. Whereas now we've got a WhatsApp group, and we might touch on that a little bit as well with the Israel boys. We've got a group and we're always asking the same questions, like, where's O'Brien? Where's Stocker? Well, guess what? They're in the scratch matches, having to really bust down the door. And, you could make the case that they're doing that for a reason. So that way, when Stocker does get into the side, he's not just in and out.
Yeah, mate, 100% for sure. Like, I love seeing Stocker play in the twos, and and he's not ripping up the twos, so we shouldn't bring him up. And I even thought that maybe we brought in Philp a bit too early. Like, you look at Hawthorn or these great teams, you have players that are just doing unbelievably well in the VFL, and you can compare it to cricket as well. I know you're not such a cricket fan, but the strength of the Sheffield Shield, like the state league, is often indicative of the strength of the Australian team. And you don't just give players a game in the Australian test side because they've played one or two good innings in the Sheffield Shield. Like, you got to make them earn it, and placing high value on spots in the seniors. And that, I love that Teague's doing that. Yeah.
Love it.
Pick the side to win.
Yeah. One of the things, one of the many things that, I guess inspired the start of Blue Abroad was everywhere that I had travelled and gone to, I was meeting so many Carlton fans. Can you give me a bit of an insight into how many Carlton fans are there really in the Australian community in Israel, for example?
Yeah, mate, I keep on getting surprised, like, when I'm meeting new Carlton fans. A lot of sort of Australian, the generation above me, who had kids in Israel, and they're full-fledged Israelis. Like, they speak English with an Australian accent because of their parents, but they have grown up as AFL fans. We've got this one mate, Shlomi, who's like a crazy Melbourne fan.
Yeah.
And he's never lived a day in Australia in his life. Like, he's been there a few times. So Carlton, I'd say, is probably the biggest club in Israel. And people that are sort of looking to get into the game usually end up going for Carlton. But I don't know how big it is. But, mate, every time there's a grand final, there's like a bar that sort of puts on the grand final at 7 a.m. in the morning. And it's packed. Yeah, La Mer on the beach. It's like, you feel like you're living a dream. Like, you've got all the screens with the grand final on the beach, and it's packed, like hundreds of people. So, and I don't know most of them. So it's always like a surprise for me when I meet new Carlton fans. But we do have like our nucleus of Carlton fans that we're all in the WhatsApp group, and a few people have sort of left to different areas. But yeah, like there's a core group of strong Carlton fans in Tel Aviv, which would surprise a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, when I came home and when Ave came home as well, obviously the two of us with yourself and Dan, shout out to you, Dan. We had the WhatsApp group, and that's something we just had just while we were in Israel. It's just what it was. It's called Blues in Israel, and not that I'm surprised, but I guess if I had to bank on, in a year from now, will that group still be kicking? I didn't really know if it would, mate. The group's still kicking strong, and there's half of us are in Australia. You're in Tel Aviv. Dan loves to just travel. Like, it seems like he's somewhere else every week. So that's the power of what, I guess it's footy, but this is a Carlton show. So the power of our footy club, and I don't think people realise how many fans we actually do have that don't live in Australia.
Yeah. And mate, all those fans, you can knock it off. All those fans will be flying back to Australia when Carlton are in the thick of September. Like, everyone's got that little reserve of cash just ready for, like, I've got to get a plane ticket within 24 hours and spend whatever I can to get to that grand final, because you just need to have that. I mean, we've suffered for so long that we just need to be there when there's success. Like, it's a non-negotiable for me that no matter what work I'm doing or what meetings I've got, mate, Carlton's in the grand final. See you later. Like, I want to play.
So talk to me about that. So Carlton's in the grand final. It doesn't matter what the situation is. You're there.
Yeah, mate. No doubt. I mean, I buy a Carlton membership every year. Knowing that I'm not going to be able to go to too many games, just because I'm like, just want to be like a member. I want to be a part of the team. Like and yeah, missing out on a grand final would just, I mean, after all we've been through, like I've how many losses have we watched compared to wins? And
especially our generation, especially like
yeah,
your experience and my experience. I mean, I'm a 91 boy, so my memory is very similar to yours in where it starts. It starts pretty much at salary cap, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And mate, I know that Paul Barbaza was on this segment a few weeks ago, and I love their show as well. And I love hearing them talk about like the persona of the Carlton supporter evolving over time because we've just become bad. And like the Carlton supporter used to be this proud guy who'd come to the schoolyard and like just give everyone else shit and like, yeah, we're the best, and we just were like, if we weren't the best, then we'd go and get the best players and make sure that we were the best. And I'm just excited for Carlton to get back to those days. And I think what I love about AFL is that fans sort of tend to stick strong through the thick, and Carlton have definitely done that. Like there's, Carlton still get decent crowds, and it's not like Richmond that as soon as they started winning, all of a sudden their member base goes up to 100,000. Like Carlton are breaking their membership numbers after a 2-win season. So everyone's sort of on board for when the success finally comes. And I think when it does come, it's just going to be so special. And all of those, losses that I've watched, it's also that we can get to that premiership eventually. And I wouldn't miss that. I would hate to.
No, I feel you, mate. Totally feel you. Hey, I'm going to shoot a few questions at you before I let you go, just on your experience and some predictions and whatnot. Tell me a player on the list that, is, I guess, your boy, that whether he is already in the limelight or maybe someone that hasn't come through yet. Who's one of the players that you really think has some serious potential to go to that next level?
So there's the obvious ones. Okay, so take it to the next level.
Yeah.
Well, he just had a breakout game, but I've always loved David Cunningham. I think he's like super clean, and he's got I love his running patterns. Like he always seems to be thereabouts when we're breaking, and Carlton aren't so good at that. We don't have that slingshot, and I think that David Cunningham is someone that can give that to us. So he's definitely one. And then the other one I would say is like Jack Martin. People don't give him, I think, the credit that he deserves. Like he could be an All-Australian, probably not this year, maybe next year, the year after. Like I definitely see him being able to fill that All-Australian winger, half-forward flanker role.
Yep, yeah, he's one of your favourites. Yeah, he was one I can attest to this. Plenty of messages in the WhatsApp group. I was a little skeptical, to be honest with you, just because of the whole. He's come from Gold Coast. Don't know what his mentality's like, but I mean, since he's got to the club, how can you fault him? He hasn't put a foot wrong.
100%, mate. He's again, he played at Gold Coast. They didn't have a winning culture back then, and he was a product of that. And as soon as you put him inside of a winning culture, he becomes like a far better player. And I mean, he's even more special than that because he's driving us to get to that winning culture. But yeah, he's you gotta. It's never as bad as it seems with the bottom end, and it's never as good as it seems with the top end. And you got to keep that in mind when assessing those players.
You sound like Brendan Bolton giving me the equilibrium speech.
Yeah. You know what, Brendan Bolton, if there was one good thing about him, it was that he knew how to talk. He knew how to handle a press conference.
Yeah. If any situation was negative, he could turn it into a positive for sure. I've got another one for you. What's your highlight as a Carlton fan, whether it was a game or a season? What's one of the memories that really sticks with you?
Yeah, so pretty easy one. For me, it was the 2013 Richmond elimination final. I was actually watching that in Jerusalem with like a bunch of Carlton supporters. I think there were like 10 of us, and we were, I was on my gap year then. I hadn't actually moved to Israel yet. And yeah, like again, we just had that PTSD of like, we've watched this and we weren't even meant to be there. And then all of a sudden, like Juddy and this would be fitting, and like just came from nowhere. And it's one of those ones that you're like, you just write it off, and then you're like, oh, we couldn't win this, and then all of a sudden we come back and storm home. It was just an un-Carlton-like performance, or Carlton of old performance, you should say.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I relate to that. I remember I was at the game, and I remember having this feeling of, oh my God, we almost don't deserve to win this, and we're going to pinch it, and it's going to go in the history books because it's a final, and we're going to get to talk about it. And even though Richmond have won flags ever since, it's at least we've got that, head-to-head final win over them. Even the Bombers, we've got that 2011 win over them. It was us versus them. It was, they could talk about line positions,
It's really crazy to think back at that and think that from that final, Carlton just went down, and Richmond, I mean, they also went down, but then after about 3 years, it was that team pretty much that won the grand final in 2017. So yeah, like it's, as I said, never as good as it seems, never as bad as it seems.
Yeah, spot on. One more before I let you go. I need you to put in a prediction for the year that we win the flag. So we'll look back on this and see if you were correct.
Okay, so I'm going to rule out 2021.
Okay.
As in 20 and 21. I think that our flag is going to depend a lot on Charlie and how much Charlie can get up. So I'm going to say that 2023 is the year that we win a flag, after sort of tasting that finals, hopefully deep into the finals in 22 and 21. Because I think you need to lose a prelim before you win a grand final. That's sort of my theory on things, and it doesn't always prove true, but I think with Carlton, that's something that's going to need to happen, because losing a grand final can sort of break a club, as it did to Adelaide. Losing a prelim pretty much galvanizes a club a lot of the time.
I totally agree with your theory. I think obviously the doggies are, the anomaly there, but I genuinely believe this group need to, very similar to what we're seeing now, they've lost for so much that they need to learn how to win. And then, we're looking at just getting wins on the board in the regular season. These kids still need to learn how to win on the bigger stage. And I think I'm with you on that 100%. I think we need to experience finals defeat, because that's what you take into your preseason that allows you to train to that next level,
100%. Yeah. And you're left with that belief that you can be there, but you're just not. And it's funny that I say prelims galvan. I mean, Melbourne went from losing a prelim to like bottom four side 2 years in a row. But yeah, I mean, if you look back at a lot of the grand finalists, it's after they've lost a prelim the year before. So I hope that we can lose a prelim this year. Let's say that. I think that would be a great result.
Yeah, love it. Well, mate, thank you so much. I'm very proud of you. Obviously, it goes without saying. I miss you to bits. I cannot wait to come and see you, and I can't wait for you to come here and see a win with you, have a beer, have a Carlton draft on tap. Wish you all the best, and thank you so much for coming on.
Tez, thanks so much for having me. And I seriously love your channel, and it really, you're not a blue abroad anymore, but I am, and I feel like the channel just keeps me tied to what's really going on in the supporter base. It's not the high level media from afl.com.au. It's like, it's fans, it's raw, it's and I love it, and I'm so happy to see it growing.
Love it, mate. Go the Blues.
See you, mate. Go the Blues.